What's good, Fantasy and Frames family? Welcome back to Fourth and Frames. My name is Andrew Scott, and I'll be your host this evening. Joining me, as always, are my boys Rhett and Chris. And tonight, we're going to make a little pivot from our rookie content that we've been working on and get into some redraft stuff. So we're going to get into our top 12 fantasy options at both the running back and the wide receiver position. But before we do that, Gator J, play our music, baby. Let's go. All right, before we go any further, please make sure to like the stream, subscribe to the channel, and smack that little bell that's going to pop up to make sure that you're notified every time the Fantasy and Frames Network pushes out new content. While you're here, make sure to go over to Twitter, give our show a follow at Fourth and Frames, and go gas up my boys Chris and Rhett at FFChrisB and at R Manual Sports. And we can't forget to show some love to the man behind the glass, Gator J, who can be found at FantasyJ77. Also, speaking of Twitter, just a reminder, if you're dropping any comments on Twitter, we can't see those on the show. So make sure to come on over to YouTube with us so that you can jump into the conversation. Chris, how are you tonight, man? Have any of your 500 rookie drafts you had going calmed down at all since the draft wrapped up?
Not at all. I mean, it's getting close to the end of draft season for me. I got a few lingering leagues that are going to take a bit to get into motion, but I'm okay with that.
Right on, right on. Rhett, how you doing, man? You ready to dig into some redraft stuff tonight or what?
Ready to dig into some redraft stuff. Also, a little bit bitter in my rookie draft situation. I've talked to it with y'all. We're not going to get into it, but let's just say somebody broke our league, and it's fine. We're going to deal with it. We're going to keep it moving.
Yeah, keep it moving, man. Just keep on grooving. You're all right. You're all right. All right. With that being said, no reason to delay it. Let's just jump right into it. We're going to kick it off with the running back position. And let's start off with the back-end RB1s before we get into the heavy hitters. So right now, I'll kick it off. My back-end RB1s, I've got at RB12 for redraft. I've got Naji Harris. At running back 11, Breece Hall. RB10, Tony Pollard. RB9, Ramone Stevenson. RB8, Derrick Henry. And then RB7, Nick Chubb. Chris, what's your back-end RB1s looking like?
You got a good list there, Drew, I must say. For me, RB12, Breece Hall from the New York Jets. RB11, I got Tony Pollard. 10, probably one of the hardest guys for me to rank, Ramone Stevenson. 9, Travis Etienne. 8, Bijan Robinson. And my RB7, Nick Chubb.
Right on. I like it. I'm with you on Ramondre. I almost wanted to put him higher, man, but it's tough.
Tempting, man.
It is. Rhett, what's your back end RB1s looking like?
All right, to make things look completely different than both of y'all, because that's apparently what's going to happen tonight. RB12, I have Travis Etienne. By the way, that is the Louisiana pronunciation, is Etienne. RB11, Ramone Stevenson. RB10, Bijan Robinson. RB9, Derrick Henry. RB8, Breece Hall, and RB7, Nick Chubb.
I like it. That's a new pronunciation for me. I did not know that. So we got Hollywood Titan in the chat tonight as well. What's up, man? Thank you for joining us. All right, so we got our back-end RB1s listed. So, gentlemen, I got to know, which running back was the most difficult for you to leave outside of your top 12?
All right, let's just start off and let me just say that I was really close to putting Seattle's Ken Walker in my top 12, and here's why. I mean, when he emerged last year, he emerged in a big way. He was a big play machine. He had 17 breakaway runs, which is classified as a 15-yard run or more last year, which was pretty high up there among the league. Had a 31% juke rate. Amongst his touches, he was top 5 in the league. He had 52 touches in the red zone last year, and that equated to 9 total touchdowns. So he was really well used and extremely effective inside the red zone as well. Parlay that into a 1,000-yard rushing season, 1,051 yards. And actually among that, in the 17-game season, he had 9 games where he had 70 rushing yards or more. So we're not just talking about a guy that was flashing in the pan. He was all over the place, having consistently good games last year. And that was a 4.6 yards per carry season as well. Now, I get where people are going to go with this. They're going to say, But Red, what about Zach Charbonnet? Listen, there may be a Zach Charbonnet problem looming. I understand it. I get it. But I've heard various podcasts say this. If there's one thing I'm going to bet on is the fact that we know that Ken Walker can work in the NFL, and we don't know that about Zach Charbonnet yet. So I believe in his talent because I also believe that he's an underrated pass catcher with some upside there, and there's some big play ability there last year that we saw as well. So that being said, with the Charbonnet problem looming, he had to be omitted from the top 12 because of the uncertainty that Charbonnet's draft capital and the similar styles bring. But at the same time, I feel like now that we're looking at where we are, he's likely to be had at more of a value because of Zach Charbonnet and all those things. So because of those same concerns that might be holding him out of the top 12, you might be also able to get Ken Walker at a value. So Ken Walker for me.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I'm one of those guys where the Charbonnet problem is what kept him out of my top 12. If the Seahawks don't go Charbonnet there in the second round, Ken Walker's easily in my top 12 this year. But he did get bumped down a little bit for redraft purposes whenever that happened. Chris, what about you, man? Who was the guy toughest for you to leave out of your top 12?
Ken Walker, definitely a great pick there. Another guy that I had trouble keeping out of the top 12 based on what he did last season. But for me, redraft, it's got to be Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. If the legal issues don't net any missed games for Joe Mixon, if you're drafting now, he's going to be a value based on where you're going to get him. Samaje Perine's gone. There's absolutely no competition for touches. Yes, they did draft Chase Brown, or on Mocking After Dark, he's known as Chris Brown. They got Travion Williams there, who's been kind of hyped up this past week, and they got Chris Evans. So the backfield, the talent is minuscule based on what Joe Mixon can do. 3 games last season, he had 7 catches and he was targeted 9 times. A couple of those games, I believe at least one of them was when Samaje Perine was still with the Bengals. He had a 65% snap share last season with Samaje Perine in the fold. He was the RB7 in total targets with 74. He was the RB5 in total receptions with 60. Mix that with the fact that he is utilized as the main running back in that backfield. You plus that, you add that with those receptions, with the targets for Joe Mixon. He can instantly be a top 6, top 8 running back at the end of the year. 441 total receiving yards. That, again, RB6. All these categories that he's in, and these categories, efficiency metrics and advanced metrics are nice, but those metrics don't net fantasy points. These are the numbers that net you fantasy points, and you can see when he is healthy, when he is on the field for the Bengals, he is printing fantasy points for you. 46 red zone touches, again, RB6, 11 on the goal line. His advanced efficiency, I mentioned that, weren't the greatest. He wasn't known last season to break off giant runs, but with the volume in the running game tied to his volume in the passing game, Joe Mixon is a guy that could easily slot in as an RB1.
Yeah, I like it, man. You might have just talked me into it. I might have to move him up a little bit, honestly. Because, the offense he's in, not going to get a lot of stacked boxes. You're really going to stack the box on Joe Mixon and let Joe Burrow eat you up with Chase and Higgins and Boyd.
Exactly.
You got to pick your poison, and I'd rather try to let Mixon beat me than those guys. So, yeah, it's tough, man. It's going to be a good, high-scoring offense. He should get plenty. There's a lot of touchdown upside, like you mentioned, with the red zone touches. Mm-hmm. The legal stuff did scare me a little bit, spooked me. It's still kind of just hanging out there, but kind of similar to what Rhett was talking about with Ken Walker's, possibly with the Zach Charbonnet thing, making him a value. I think with this legal stuff and not knowing what the outcome of it is, if he ends up coming out of it clean, Mixon could be, another value as well. So I like that pick a lot. That
was the main thing for me, was that the legal issue, since we're in May and it's still kind of murky. That's what kept me from putting Joe Mixon into that top 12. But like 8 to 15 for me is kind of interchangeable with the running backs that are left off the list, like Ken Walker, Joe Mixon, even Alvin Kamara with the legal troubles. If Alvin Kamara was another guy I was considering putting in this slot, if Alvin Kamara's legal troubles don't net him any kind of lost games, he's another guy that can easily fit in as an RB1.
Yeah, and you can use. I mean, it's a gamble, but you can use that type of stuff to get values in these early redraft leagues. Like, I mean, whenever I was doing the Scott Fish Bowl last year, the draft was pretty early in the offseason, and the legal troubles were still kind of hanging out there for Kamara, and I got Kamara way later than he had any business going. If we knew that he wasn't going to get suspended, but at that time we didn't know, and I took the gamble, and we could be in a similar situation with Joe Mixon this year. So I like it. So on the flip side of that, which of these running backs outside of your top six that we'll talk about here in a minute do you think has the best chance to finish as the overall RB1? So Chris, which of these guys do you think it could possibly be your overall RB1 at the end of the season?
For me, and I mentioned it at the top, it's Ramone Stevenson. I was ready to rank this guy in the top 5. 88 targets last year, 69 receptions. He was logged in as the RB3 in that category. 210 attempts, 1,000 total yards. He was running at a 4.5 yard per carry clip. If Stevenson can get better at securing the touchdown, because inside the 5, he was a bottom running back when it comes to terms of just getting into the end zone. So he wasn't that efficient when given the opportunities inside the 5. Damian Harris is out of there. There's not much else behind Ramone Stevenson. He was a top 3 RB in the league, posting a 40.5% juke rate. And what that does for fantasy managers is that's letting you know that he has an ability to evade tackles, miss tackles, evade the defenders, and ultimately that equals yardage points for you in terms of the running back. So RB3 and evaded tackles as well. Those two things tied together are going to make him a valuable asset come fantasy draft season. RB6 and breakaway runs that are 15 or more yards. He had 15 of those last season. I mentioned it. No Damian Harris. They brought in Ty Montgomery. They had James Robinson. James Robinson last year on the Jets couldn't beat out Bam Knight and Michael Carter.
Mm-hmm.
The role I see for James Robinson in this offense, because of how inefficient Ramone Stevenson was on the goal line, is possibly being that Jamal Williams type player for the New England Patriots, where they bring in the bigger back to go in. Not saying that Ramone Stevenson is small, because by no means is Ramone Stevenson small weight-wise.
Right.
I see a situation where James Robinson comes in and snakes some of those lucrative touchdowns, which for running backs is going to equal for him to get to that RB1 slot. Tied to that, Bill O'Brien coming in as offensive coordinator, the same Bill O'Brien that helped get Jahmyr Gibbs to be a top 15 NFL draft pick. I don't know if Gibbs is a top 15 draft pick if he's a first rounder, if he stays at Georgia Tech and doesn't join that Alabama offense under Bill O'Brien. And if you look at Bill O'Brien's history, whether it's with Houston, Alabama, or even reaching back to his time with Penn State, he made guys like Alfred Blue, Duke Johnson, Lamar Miller, and then on Penn State, Zach Zwinnach relevant in terms of fantasy production. So he's a do-it-all back with no real competition for touches, and he will be utilized. So Ramone Stevenson is one of my picks to finish as maybe the overall RB1, but at least one of those guys that has a good possibility to finish in that top 3.
Yeah, and it's like, go ahead, Rhett.
Yo, Chris, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All right, so I understand where you are with the Ramondre stuff. Great. What you didn't mention, and I have to ask you about it, with Bill Belichick's finicky nature and his history with running backs, give me a confidence rating on how confident you are that Ramondre is going to maintain this, because we know how Bill has been in history.
I mean, I'm pretty confident, because the guys that are behind him, they don't have that skill to be able to cut into his role. Like I said, Ty Montgomery, James Robinson, guys that couldn't beat out guys that are lesser talents than Ramone Stevenson on their previous rosters. And then if you're looking at, if you break down his game log for Ramondre, he's had games where the semifinals of the fantasy playoffs last year, he had a snap share of 89%. Buffalo week 13, 98%. Minnesota week 12, 80%. And the games behind that, Jets, Indianapolis, 76.3%, 70.7% of a snap share. So that's with Damian Harris. That's with other guys in that backfield. So I'm pretty confident that they know what they have with Ramone Stevenson. Bill O'Brien has been known to kind of attach himself to one running back in his running back rooms. So I'm pretty confident that Ramone Stevenson should have a valuable role.
Now, we can't forget about Mr. Pierre Strong either. I believe, Rhett, aren't you a fan of Pierre Strong? You want to talk about him a little bit, how he might be some competition for touches for Ramondre?
Look, all I know is that last year coming out of the draft, I saw a 6'1", 215-pound running back who ran a sub 4.4, who caught the ball well, who has vision, who has all this upside. So I'm not saying that Ramondre Stevenson is going to give the room up to Pierre Strong, but we mentioned Ty Montgomery, we mentioned James Robinson, and we know both of these guys don't have that track record of beating out other guys. Truthfully, if there is one person that has the upside to possibly up in Ramondre in that running back room in terms of athletic profiles, it's going to be Pierre Strong.
Yeah, yep, I agree with that. I wish I had the note in front of me, but I don't. But I remember seeing it on Twitter. I think it might have been the Athletic reporter that covers the Patriots, but it was speculation. It wasn't a legitimate report or anything like that. But they speculated that James Robinson might not even be a lock to make the Patriots roster. So take that for what it's worth. I think it will be a two-man backfield between Ramondre and Pierre Strong, with Ramondre handling the heavy portion of the load. And he was one of the guys, if I had to answer this question, he would have been one of my answers for this as well. But Rhett, we talked about Ramondre. So who do you got? Which guy outside of your top six do you think has the upside to finish as the overall RB1?
All right, I'm going old chalk here. I'm going old money, and I'm going with Derrick Henry. I mean, I get that he's 29 years old. I get that the legs have a lot of carries on him. But the bottom line is that it's still good to be the king, and you're still Derrick Henry. Let's just face it. If you're looking at the Tennessee Titans this coming season, have you looked at that wide receiver room, Chris Battistel? It's not great.
Not at all.
Ryan Tannehill is a quarterback, 35 years old. We're not sure what that is anymore. So if we're going to be honest, there is a very good chance that the Tennessee Titans will run early, run often, and run regularly here in 2023. And even if you have a guy like Tyjae Spears or Hassan Haskins emerge and take away some of that workload, Derrick Henry was around 350 carries last season. So if that number comes down to still 250 carries or so, he's still near the top of the league. And he's still one of the most dominant runners in the league. Last year, he was number 2 in rushing yards. Shockingly, Derrick Henry was number 9 in running back reception yards last year. So even in a little half PPR situation, you've got a guy who can still provide you a little more juice than you would expect. Averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game last year. So for me, that magic number of a guy that you want to start on a weekly basis is around 15 or 16. He's up there around 19. Add that up over a season, you've got a guy who was rock solid for you. Really simply put, Derrick Henry has a proven track record. And I know he's 29 years old, and I know they drafted Tyjae Spears, and I know all these different things. But if you're looking for one last season, and we're talking about redraft right now, we're not talking about Dynasty. If you're looking for one last dance with the king, then attach yourself to Derrick Henry, because I feel strongly that there's a possibility that he can have one more special season in him before we see that drop off.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to bet on somebody to finish as the overall RB1, it's not a bad idea to bet on somebody that's done it before. And he's getting paid like a top running back, and I would imagine that this new front office will want to ride him while they can, before that contract expires, get the most they can out of him. So I don't hate the pick at all. So I got another question for you guys based on these back end RB1s. I don't like saying this, but I'm the only one of us three that has Naji Harris inside my top 12, and it doesn't feel good, but that's where he landed at. And I've got Travis Etienne outside of that. Now, for the record, I've been a huge Etienne fan going back to his days at Clemson. Rhett, I know you outdate me even beyond that in terms of how long you've covered Etienne. And he was my running back 1 in his rookie class over the aforementioned Naji Harris. But I'd be lying if I said that the Tank Bigsby draft selection and Doug Peterson's history of running back by committee didn't scare me, but for what it's worth, he would have been my answer to the question earlier, which running back was the hardest to leave outside of my top 12. But Chris, as of right now, you're the highest of us three on Etienne at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about why he should be inside my top 12.
Look, Tank Bigsby is going to cut into some of his passing work, no doubt. And that's the only situation where I really see Tank taken away from Etienne, considering the Jaguars' patterns, where they don't target the RB as much as some other teams. When you have a quarterback like Trevor Lawrence who can work with his feet, he's more likely to rush the ball than he is to dump it off to the running back. And if you look at Etienne's target share in that offense, he was the 5th most targeted player on the team, behind guys like Marvin Jones, of course, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram there. So the running back isn't a top 3 option in that offense when it comes into terms to passing. So that part there is definitely going to hurt some of Etienne's value. But his pass catching role wasn't the greatest last season, but he really came on in the last few weeks, where he carried a 42% route participation, running 65 routes through that span. So as the season went on, they utilized the pass catching running back. From week 7 on, when he was in the game, Etienne boasted a 75% average snap share. So he was on the field, and he was on the field a lot. Granted, they didn't have a Tank Bigsby behind him in that backfield. They had Jermichael Hasty there, and I forget who the third guy was, but not really that important when considering the Jaguars' backfield. Matched with that, when he did get the touches, his efficiency placed him in the top 10 at the position in yards per touch at 5.7. When the dude got the ball in his hands, he was putting in work. He finished the season as RB9 in total red zone touches, where he had 9 on the goal line. He did struggle scoring the touchdowns, but I see that as something to be a positive regression for Travis Etienne, considering he only got 4 last season. I can see a 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 touchdown increase in his usage. This is the 3rd year for Travis Etienne, 2nd year actually playing due to that Liz Frank injury that he suffered in his rookie year. And I can see a situation where he finally breaks out, secures a workload, because he can obviously see that he is capable when handling that ball, and he can get into that RB1 stratosphere for running backs. I could see a situation as well where he gets the about 1,600 scrimmage yards. So involved in the passing game, gets a little bit. He got just over 1,000 rushing yards last season. I can see that number increasing as well. Tank Bigsby is a good talent. I love it. I love the Jaguars bringing them in as a backup to Travis Etienne. I know Tank Bigsby's the hot name now. You can go on fantasy Twitter and everyone's going to be raving about Tank Bigsby's the value. Tank Bigsby's the 1B. Tank Bigsby's going to eventually take that workload from him. But let's get real here. Travis Etienne is an RB1. He's done it at every level he's played, whether it was with Clemson, where he's rushed for 1,600 yards on the season. In the NFL, he really got things going. It was a new system for him as well, considering the old coaching staff the year he was drafted was shipped out of there. So I could definitely see a situation where Travis Etienne reaches his ceiling, which is where I think I have him ranked at right now. But considering it's May, I can also see me bringing Naji Harris into my top 12, bringing Etienne back. So that's my spiel for Travis Etienne. I'm high on Travis Etienne because I love the profile. I love the player.
Yeah, I love the player too, man. And part of what makes me nervous, I know he has the 1st round draft capital, but the reality is the coaching staff that's there right now isn't the same coaching staff that drafted him in the 1st round. And it was weird because, we heard of like Urban Meyer, in which you got to take everything that Urban Meyer says with a grain of salt, but talked about using him like he was just basically like another receiver possibly. And then he didn't even really get the receiving work in his 2nd year under a new coaching staff, the 1st half of the season, like you mentioned. And it's weird because in college, he looked like a great pass catcher to me. So I thought he was very underutilized in that aspect. So if that can flip at all, I think the upside is there in spades. And he's running back 13 for me right now. So he's knocking on the door of an RB1.
He's in the fridge,
Yeah. but it's honestly the inefficiency in the red zone or in those goal to goal situations where I that's what concerns me more than anything. Is like I think this is going to be a really good offense with a lot of scoring opportunities. But what happens if he is inefficient in those, in those 10 zone touches, things like that, and they end up giving those to Tank, and Tank gets some of the touchdowns that could possibly take some of that away. So there are some concerns. It's still early. Hopefully training camp helps us clear some of those questions out. But yeah, I love Etienne, the player, just a little bit nervous about some of the moves the team has been making as of late. But I like your breakdown. It does make me feel a little bit better. Rhett, I appreciate you. Rhett, talk to me about Naji, man. What concerns are keeping him outside of your top 12 right now?
I got one all caps, glaring neon sign word for you as to why Naji Harris is not in my top 12. And that word is inefficiency. He hasn't been an efficient runner these first 2 years. He has a career. Year one was 3.9 yards per carry. Year two was 3.8 yards per carry. So he's nothing if not consistent. He just hasn't been consistently good at running the ball so far. One of the things that made him such a value in his rookie season was the receptions. He had 74 catches. That was also under Ben Roethlisberger as his quarterback. Last year, they make the switch. They draft Kenny Pickett. Those numbers plummet from 74 catches to 41 catches last season. So a lot of what made him so valuable in that first year wasn't there in year two, which makes it a gigantic question mark for year three for me. And if we want to talk about what he did with his opportunities, last year, Naji Harris averaged 0.6 fantasy points per opportunity. That was ranked 63rd among running backs. I know we're going to keep banging this inefficiency drum, so let's keep going. I mean, if I had a personal preference, I know Naji Harris is going to get volume. He's a volume play. That's why people love him, because he's going to get those 250 carries. He's going to be the guy in that offense. But as a personal preference for me, I'm an efficiency guy. So I'd rather see a guy who got 80% of the touches and did more with those touches, like a Travis Etienne might or a Ken Walker might, talking about two guys we spoke of earlier. With that said, current ADP for Naji Harris in May 2023, recording tonight, is somewhere in that mid-third. It's somewhere in that mid-third round. So in the third round, as much as I'm hating on this guy right now, that is potentially a value situation. I think he's a good value with where he's currently being drafted. So with that said, if I can get him there or possibly later, even though I'm not the biggest fan of the efficiency metrics, I'm still going to take him because I'm always a fan of values versus players. So I'll take anybody at value, and I think Naji is currently going at a value.
Yeah, there's always a point where everybody can be drafted at a price. And for Naji, look, you're not wrong, man. He is a volume play, and that's why I like him so much. That's why I have him inside my top 12. Mike Tomlin's one of the few head coaches left that has no problem giving all of the touches to one running back. And I do think, if you look at his splits from the first half of the year to the second half of the year, whenever he was dealing with the injury the first half of the season, he did, I think some of now he has been inefficient across both his years at this point, but the numbers look better across the second half of the season last year compared to the first half. So I do think that part of the early inefficiency last year was due to that injury. But I like the investment that the Steelers have made in the offensive line this offseason. They drafted Darnell Washington, who himself basically said he could just be a sixth offensive lineman. So that was at one time a weak spot for this offense. I do like the investments that they made in that will hopefully help with his efficiency. But yeah, no, you're exactly right, Rhett. I mean, for me, he's a volume play. And at the end of the day, at the running back position, volume is king, especially, whenever we're talking redraft. And so right now, as things stand, I do have him inside my top 12. I know I'm on an island on that, but as long as he's lined up to get that volume, it's tough for me to keep him out. But I share some of the same concerns that you have, so I get it. So we talked about the back end RB1s. Now it's time. Let's talk about the big dogs. So right now, to round out my top 12, the top 6 running backs that I have at RB6, I have Jonathan Taylor. At RB5, I have Josh Jacobs. At RB4, probably the shock up to this point, I have rookie sensation Bijan Robinson coming in as a top 5 running back. And then at RB3, I have Saquon Barkley. RB2, Austin Eckler, and RB1, Christian McCaffrey. If you're watching with us on YouTube, you can see my full top 12 there on the screen. Chris, shout out to you, man, for making these graphics for us. You absolutely killed it. These things look great. So if you're with us on YouTube, whether you're watching with us live or if you're watching this after we post it later on, once we wrap the show up, please hop in the comments. Let us know where you agree, where you disagree, some guys that we might be missing inside our top 12 that should be there, or some guys that are too high, too low. Let us know so we can continue the discussion in the comments. But so that's my back end, or that's my front end RB1s. Those are the big guys 1 through 6. So Rhett, who you got in your top 6?
All right, RB6, I have Josh Jacobs coming off that massive year he had last year. RB5, and this is my shocker amongst the ones I have, is Tony Pollard. I just love the upside. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. Number 4, shout out to Dan Rubenstein from the Solid Verbal for this nickname. Number 4, I have Jonathan Taylor tailback, JTT. Number 3, Saquon Barkley. RB2, Austin Eckler, and RB1, Christian McCaffrey. We're in lockstep on those top 3, Drew. So
I like it. And I think that's pretty consensus right now, but it makes a lot of sense considering the situations that they're in. So, Chris, what's your the rest of your RB1s looking like?
At 6, I'm gonna roll Saquon Barkley. 5, Derrick Henry, Tractor Cito. At number 4, I got Jonathan Taylor. 3, the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Jacobs. 2, Austin Eckler, and 1, CMC, Christian McCaffrey. Derry Sanders, baby.
Ooh, okay. All right. So we've already talked about which running back outside of our top 6 that could finish as the RB1 overall. So now I think this one might be even a little bit more difficult to answer, but I want to know which running back inside the top 6 for you guys do you think has the best chance to fall out of the top 12 entirely?
Yeah, I mean, fall out of the top 12 entirely is a big – something would have to happen there in order for one of these top 6 guys to fall out of the top 12 entirely. But for me, if I got to pick one, if you're going to twist my arm here, Drew, I'm going to go Derrick Henry. He's touched the ball 1,877 times. I know Rhett just pumped him up a bit, but I'm going to take him down. We all like to break down these guys and then build them back up again. He's
Right.
29 years old, and he'll be near 30 years old once the fantasy playoffs roll around. And he's playing on a team that is the absolute dog's breakfast in terms of personnel. The Titans are entering the season with the worst ranked offensive line in the league, losing key contributors like Taylor Lewan, their left tackle, Ben Jones, their starting center, Nate Davis, a player who left in free agency, all full-time starters for the Tennessee Titans. Yes, they brought in Skoronski there, but tied to that, they also have a bottom-ranked defense heading into the season as well. So they're going to be playing a lot of keep-up ball, and running the ball doesn't equal keep-up ball. You want to score points if you want to win games. And if the Tennessee Titans just want to tank the season, hand it to Derrick Henry 500 times and don't even try to score points in order to lock up one of the top QBs in next year's drafts. The possibility of a negative game script is so high with Derrick Henry that if there's a guy that could fall out of the top 12, for me, it's him. If he got to face Houston 17 times, he would be the perennial RB1 of the class. But the transition that the Tennessee Titans are going through, clouded by the early season trade rumors, of all the 12 RBs I have ranked here, Derrick Henry has the best chance to fall out of contention to finish as the RB1. And the H cliff is real. We've seen guys like Jamal Charles, Marshawn Lynch, DeMarco Murray. As soon as they hit that 29-year-old mark, they kind of drop off a bit. But we have seen running backs at 29 years old kind of produce, like Frank Gore and Devonta Smith, producing past their prime. So for me, and I know Derrick Henry is a very capable running back. And you asked the question, I can't just say nobody to you. I got to give you something, Drew. So for me, it's the It's the surrounding personnel, the surrounding gas, the situation that the Tennessee Titans are in that could be detrimental to his success.
Right. It's wild that, you mentioned DeMarco Murray. You also mentioned that 1,877 times he's touched the ball. And that's factoring in that his first couple of years, he didn't really have a bunch of touches.
Yeah, I think it was like 157 and 110 actual rushes. So that 1,877 number is his pass catching and his rushing. And that doesn't include his time at Alabama.
Right. It's wild the touches he's racked up over the last few years. It's true definition of a workhorse when he's out there and when he's healthy.
Yes,
but it is concerning. All right, so Rhett, which running back outside of the top 6 could you see falling out?
Yeah, the same one that raised my eyebrows whenever I put him as my RB5 is the same one I have to say can drop out of the top 12, and that is Tony Pollard, because here's why. First off, I have him top 5 because of that massive upside he's going to possess. We saw the 1,000-yard season last year on 50-50 workload. We saw the big plays. We know the passing work. We know the capability is there. But the bottom line is that throughout his career, we've never seen him handle more than a 50-50 workload. A lot of times it's been less when Zeke was in his prime. So it's hard for me to go wheels up all the way on this guy as a running back 1. And go all in because, frankly, we haven't seen it done before. And the question is also going to happen. Is Zeke still unsigned in free agency? He is. And there's been speculation that Zeke's going to end up back in Dallas. So with that being said, that also can potentially change the math on what Tony Pollard is going to be, because if Zeke is there, he's effectively a goal line back. He's, to drop the name again, it's a Jamal Williams situation for him once again, and Tony Pollard is more of a between-the-20s sort of guy. So, yes, Tony Pollard was extremely efficient. He was a big efficiency guy last year, and I'm big on efficiency. But usually when you're that efficient, you're also due for something of a regression the following season. Also, here's the thing with Tony Pollard. Currently is going at a late second-round ADP. We are approaching Tony Pollard's grown and sexy season right now in terms of draft capital. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, it's too high. If I see the opportunity to draft Tony Pollard in the second round, I'm staying away. I'm letting somebody else potentially go there. But for me right now, despite how much I like him as a player, it's hard for me to go in on a guy that's going that high when, frankly, we haven't seen him do the workhorse thing on a full-time basis.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, they got Schottenheimer as the OC now, who loves to run the ball. Mike McCarthy was quoted last year that he didn't feel like they were running the ball enough, and he wanted to I hate this line of thinking, but he wanted to run the ball to give his defense a break. And like they got elite pass catchers. They got Dak Prescott at quarterback who they paid a ton of money, but they just want to run the ball. And it's like, so Tony Pollard could be in line for a huge workload, but we've also never seen him handle that workload, like you said. So I think his range of outcomes are pretty wide to where, he could be the answer of somebody that could finish as the overall RB1, and he could also be an answer for somebody that could drop outside of the top 12. He really is one of the toughest players to rank right now, in my opinion. Me personally, if I had to answer this question, it would probably be Bijan, and nothing to do with Bijan himself. It's just I have no faith in Arthur Smith correctly using a highly drafted offensive player, because they've used high draft capital on pass catchers the last 2 years in Kyle Pitts and Drake London, and then, proceeded to run Tyler Algier into the ground. And so now that they've drafted Bijan, I just feel like Arthur Smith's going to find some weird way to mess that up. But speaking of Bijan, there's a lot of similar names inside our top 6. To be exact, there's 5 running backs that we all have inside our top 6. However, I'm the only one that has Bijan in that group. So, Chris, we already heard about Derrick Henry's upside whenever Rhett discussed him. You tore him down a little bit. So, we won't get into that too much. But what worries you most about Bijan during his rookie season?
There isn't much that worries me about Bijan Robinson. It's just tough for me to slot him in the top 6 without seeing him produce on an NFL field. If they use him in all aspects of their rushing attack and passing game, he could definitely finish as a top 5 guy. And to be honest, I don't see a situation where they don't utilize his skills all over the field. To be honest, the 4 to 8 spots with my rankings can be easily interchangeable. I think I got him in a pretty fair spot at RB8 there in May. Algier was efficient in his role, and he should have a decent amount of work in his offense. But ultimately, in my best Macho Man Randy Savage impression, Algier was justifiably to be in a position he'd rather not be, but the cream rises to the top. Oh, yeah. And Bijan Robinson is the cream of the crop in this class, and he's the cream of the crop in that running back room. So worried? No, nothing outside of his lack of field experience on an NFL field am I too worried about.
I think you might just have given us a new YouTube short with that right there. That Macho Man clip is made for the internet. We got to get that out there. No, I like it, man. And I get the argument of not seeing him on an NFL field. You know, there's a lot of guys that produce in college that it doesn't always translate. For me personally, I just think that Bijan is just too good that he is going to absolutely eat in this Atlanta offense. And hopefully they feed him the ball in the same fashion that they fed Tyler Algier the ball down the stretch, especially in the fantasy playoffs. You know, if you had Algier on your roster in the fantasy playoffs last year, you know how sweet that was and how much Arthur Smith loves to run the ball, considering they had, you know, Drake London and Kyle Pitts and just refused to ever throw the ball. So with that being said, that's a wrap on our early running back rankings. Those will be on our personal Twitter accounts. Chris made those fire graphics for us. We're going to get those posted out there, going to put on the internet. So, you know, we'll be able to continue the discussion on Twitter as far as the rest of it. But I want to pause real quick before we get into the wide receiver rankings. If you're enjoying this content, we would greatly appreciate if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little bell that's going to pop up so that you're notified whenever new content is published. Just a reminder again, if you're watching us on Twitter, we're not able to see your comments, so be sure to come over on YouTube, join us over there so that you can get into the conversation with us. And then if you're not watching this live, please hop in the comments whenever you are watching. Let us know who your top 5 running backs are so that we can continue this conversation in the comments with you as well. All the interaction is extremely helpful with our channel's growth, and we appreciate the support. So we're going to speed through, for the second time, we're going to speed through our top 12 wide receivers. So right now, my back end wide receiver ones at wide receiver 12. I've got T. Higgins, wide receiver 11. I've got Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 10. I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. At 9, I've got Garrett Wilson. At 8, I've got CeeDee Lamb. And at 7, I've got Devontae Adams. So, Rhett, what's your back end wide receiver ones looking like?
Wide receiver 12, we have the baddest man, the boombox god, Deebo Samuel. Wide receiver 11, DK Metcalf. Wide receiver 10, Garrett Wilson. Wide receiver 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Wide receiver 8, Devontae Adams. And wide receiver 7, CeeDee Lamb. A little bit lower on CD than most of you guys.
Okay. All right. Chris, what about you?
At 12, I got DK Metcalf. 11, I'm surprised I'm the only guy with Chris Olave in his top 12, but I got Chris Olave. 10, Garrett Wilson. 9, I got Amon-Ra St. Brown. 8, Devontae Adams. And 7, A.J. Brown.
I was honestly surprised being on here with 2 Saints fans. I figured I'd be the only one that didn't have Chris Olave inside my top 12. So that was a little bit surprising to me. So we're going to stick to the same theme as the running backs here, fellas. We'll go through this pretty quickly. Which wide receiver was the toughest to leave outside of your top 12, Chris?
There's a few I could easily slot in here, like Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, but for me, it's Jalen Waddle. And if you look at Jalen Waddle's numbers, when Tua Tagovailoa was the QB, the starting QB for the Dolphins, Jalen Waddle was the wide receiver 1. He finishing as a wide receiver 1 last season in total points, wide receiver 1 in average points scored on a weekly basis in a room that does feature Tyreek Hill. Tua for me, I'm keeping him outside of the top 12 based strictly on Tua's health. 2 seasons over 1,000 yards. Last year, he was a model of efficiency where he garnered 1,356 yards on 75 catches. That's 300 more yards than 2021 with almost 30 less receptions. So big season. Last season, he was the wide receiver 1 in yards per route run at 2.81, wide receiver 1 in yards per target at 11.7, wide receiver 1 in yards per reception at 18.1. And according to Player Profiler, he was the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per target at a clip of 2.23. So for me, again, the situation is Tua Tagovailoa, and that's what it comes down to. That's what limits me from putting him into my top 12. And the stats prove that when Tua's healthy, when Tua's in the game, he could sustain 2 top end wide receivers. When he was out, Tyreek Hill was the hyper targeted wide receiver for Skylar Thompson and Teddy Bridgewater. In games with Tua, Waddle averaged 7.4 targets, 4.7 receptions, 89.7 yards, and just over half a touchdown. And then without Tua, his average has dropped to 3.8 receptions, 5.4 targets, 55.8 yards, and 0 touchdowns. And another reason is that he's a big boom player. 63% of his fantasy production came on those big boom plays. Of those, I think it was like a 6-game mark where he finished as a wide receiver 1, which contributed to a lot of his fantasy success.
So what I'm hearing is I really need Tua to stay healthy for my top 12 ranking of Waddle.
Yeah, if you want Waddle to succeed, you need Tua.
Okay, so Rhett, what about you?
All right, pure bias talking for me, but it was real tough for me to keep Chris Olave out of my top 12 because I am a Saints guy, as both of you know. A couple weeks ago, we went to night court and we had a debate, Garrett Wilson versus Chris Olave. I took the Olave section, and since then, I've seen the light. Thank you for that, Chris. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, coming into 2023, there are going to be a ton of game script questions with the Saints and how they're going to run their offense that need to be answered. Yes, there's a new quarterback, but there's very likely no Alvin Kamara, so it's hard to know which direction this offense is going to take. You'd think with a guy like Chris Olave, with Juwan Johnson, with the possibility of Michael Thomas and Rashid Shaheed, that they would want to throw the ball more because Derek Carr has always been a guy who's thrown it a lot. But they also signed Jamal Williams and drafted Kendre Miller, 2 physical backs. So it's hard to really know exactly where they're going to go. And it seems like they might be leaning towards a run-first sort of situation. And on top of that, with Chris Olave, for the athletic specimen that he is, last year he had trouble getting separation. He finished, and according to Player Profiler, get this, he finished 80th in terms of separation, only averaging 1.5 yards of separation at the moment a pass arrived to him. So he wasn't separating from guys. He just happened to be out physicaling guys to get the ball. For a freak like him, that needs to improve in that second year. And in terms of receiver rankings, I just like the track record of a Deebo Samuel better. Chris Olave seemed to be dependent on the long ball last year, and Deebo can pretty much do it whether he's catching it on a screen or going deep. He does it everywhere. So for me, that was a safer bet to be in that top 12 of wide receivers than Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, it's tough to find a guy better than Deebo after the catch whenever it comes to just getting his production however he has to get it. But on the flip side of that, which of your receivers outside of the top 6 do you think has the best chance to finish as the overall wide receiver 1, Rhett?
Oh, that's easy for me. That is Davante Adams, and it's very simple as to why. He had 180 targets last year, and he finished as the wide receiver 3, so he wasn't very far off. And the team got worse, and they're probably going to be playing from behind more often this year. So you can see where those numbers could possibly go up, especially with no Darren Waller and no significant improvements to the wide receiver room. I mean, you could see where it's very possibly wheels up for Davante Adams. And doing research on him, there's one thing I didn't realize is that last year, Davante Adams' yards per reception was a very solid 15.2 yards per reception, and I wasn't expecting it to be that high. He had the top target share in the league. He actually had the most air yards in the league, and it's all lined up for him to do it again. I know with receivers and most players, that age 30 clip that he's approaching is a super dangerous one.
Right.
But on the flip side, he's never been a guy who's won with speed. It's always been footwork. It's always been just being that guy, just being able to route run and get separation in that regard. So for me, that makes me even more confident that he'll be able to do that once again in 2023. If there's going to be a wide receiver one to break out for me from that bottom half of the top 12, Davante Adams seems like a very safe bet to do that for me.
Yeah, I think what scares me the most about Davante honestly has nothing to do with Davante. It's more so that he's playing with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback now, and I'm a known Jimmy Garoppolo hater. It's just I'll go on record saying that I don't think he's that great. And I think that A-dot that you mentioned, him, having that 15.2 yards per catch, I think it's going to be tough for him to replicate that with Jimmy G. I just don't think his skill set lines up with being able to do that. But as far as Davante Adams' skill set goes, like you mentioned, he is a route running technician. He's going to put on a clinic in that aspect. So as long as Garoppolo can just get the ball in his hands, Adams can take care of the rest. So I love Adams, the player. My concerns have nothing to do with him. But Chris, what about you?
I mean, can I just pick Davante Adams and then we can rewind the stream about 5 minutes prior and just listen to Rhett talk that magic again? Because that was spot on. If there's one guy outside of my top 6 that I think could finish at the top 6, I mean, Davante Adams has got to be on your list. Also, A.J. Brown, without going too deep as to why he could be in that spot, because I know my guy Rhett is about to drop some absolute knowledge on the player that is A.J. Brown. In that Philly offense, he finally came into his own. 146 targets, 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns. If he can get his reception number up a little bit to around that 100 mark and doesn't see a regression in targets or touchdowns, there's definitely a possibility that Arthur Juan Sr. can be that wide receiver one for you coming into the season.
Yeah, I know Rhett's gonna like your pick quite a bit. So I know that he's going to be inside the top 6 for a couple of us. So let's get those fancy graphics back on the screen. I'll go first. We talked about wide receivers 7 through 12. So now the big guys at the wide receiver position at wide receiver 6, I've got A.J. Brown. At wide receiver 5, Stephon Diggs. Wide receiver 4, Tyreek Hill. Wide receiver 3, Cooper Kupp. Wide receiver 2, Jamar Chase. And wide receiver 1, Justin Jefferson. And as Stacey said, absolute stud for Davante Adams. The dude is an incredible wide receiver. Chris, what lines out your top 6?
For me at 6, I got Stephon Diggs, Buffalo Bills, CeeDee Lamb at number 5. I got the resurgence of Cooper Kupp, a guy that I wrestled with putting him at 1, considering what he was able to do in that offense when he was healthy, with a healthy Matt Stafford. I mean, he was playing above everyone else at the position, but I'm going to slot him in there at 4. I got Tyreek Hill at 3, number 2, Jamar Chase, and number 1, Justin Jefferson.
And for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure on a points per game basis, Cooper Kupp was still the wide receiver 1. I know he got hurt, so he doesn't have the counting stats for the entire season. But
what it was, I think it was an 18.1 was the mark he was hitting
per
game on a per game basis.
Yeah, he came out with a 30 burger. He came out with a 30 burger right off the rip in week 1, so that never hurts either. So, Rhett, what about you? What's your top 6 looking like?
Wide receiver 6, I'm lower than him on you guys. I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 6.
Put some respect on his name.
Oh, I knew I was going to get some heat for that one. Wide receiver 5, Stephon Diggs. Wide receiver 4, Tyreek Hill. My guy, wide receiver 3, A.J. Brown. And we're in lockstep on 2 and 1, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Like, you can't argue it at that point. Those guys are special.
Yeah, those guys seem to be locked and loaded. Pretty much consensus as to wide receiver 1 and 2. It's almost like wide receiver 1A and 1B at this point, both for Dynasty and for redraft purposes. All right, so we talked about which receiver outside the top 6 could finish at wide receiver 1 overall. So I'm going to ask you guys this gross question again.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
Which wide receiver inside your top 6 do you think has the best chance to fall out of the top 12 entirely? And I want to preface this. I saw an interesting note that as far as top 12 or top 10 wide receivers, I think it was, that on a year-by-year basis, there's typically 3 to 5 receivers that didn't finish inside the top 10 the year prior that finished inside the top 10 the next year. So as much as we like to just kind of put the same guys in there, there is a lot of turnover inside that top 10. So which one of these guys could possibly fall outside of the top 12, Chris?
This is a tough one. Dropping completely out of the top for any of these guys that I have in the top 6 would mean most likely that they have suffered either an injury, multiple week injury, season-ending injury, God forbid any of that happens, an injury to their quarterback, something devastating to happen for this top 6. Because if you look at the top 6 that we all have across the board, they're studs, man. These guys that I don't really see having too much of a negative regression in their game in order for them to drop out of that wide receiver 1 role. But for the sake of the show, I'm going Tyreek Hill, and icky as that made me feel to say, and I don't feel good about saying Tyreek Hill. Ultimately, if he does, it's because Tua went down, and still that may not even happen with Tua last year, because Hill was the go-to target for Skylar Thompson, and he was the go-to target for Teddy Bridgewater, which I mentioned earlier. All these 6 to 12, 1 to 12 elite fantasy producing wide receivers, and can most likely flourish in any situation they are thrown in, no matter what or who is throwing them the ball. But if I had to pick one, Drew, and you're making me pick one in the private chat, Drew said, if you guys don't pick one, you're off the show for the rest of the month. I went Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I'm reconsidering my position here because, I'm looking ahead a little bit. I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm looking at Rhett's answer. And I think I'm just going to throw him off the show because of who he chose. So, Rhett, go ahead, Rhett. Hit me with it, man. Tell me who the guy is that you think has the best chance of falling out of the top 12.
Sorry, bud, but it's got to be Cooper Kupp for me. And here's why. The Rams are expected to be bad this year. And if I'm correct on this, don't they actually finally have a first-round pick this year, Drew?
Believe it or not, they actually do. Yeah.
They do. So, look, here's where we are. If the Rams are bad and they're trying to maximize that draft capital, if there's somebody who is a great IR candidate for a phantom foot injury by week 10, it's Cooper Kupp. So I know we're playing with what ifs here. I understand that, but there's also the fact that last year and heading into this season, we have real concerns about Matt Stafford's health. We know Stafford and Kupp have this special connection, but if it's Stetson Bennett throwing to Cooper Kupp, can we really expect that same production? It's hard to tell. Don't get me wrong. Cooper Kupp is still a tremendous player. And if the Rams surprise and are competitive, disregard everything I just said and throw the bathwater out at that point, dog. But I mean, truth be told, with these 6 guys we have pretty much across the board, these are 6 pretty ironclad fantasy assets that we're talking about in 2023, barring injury. So you made me choose one, and I chose one. And on top of that, if we're looking at draft capital, I get it's redraft, but we're taking Cooper Kupp in the top half of the first round right now. And for me, that's rich, especially considering you can get Devontae Adams toward the bottom of the first or toward the top of the second. And you can get the guy that I'm about to talk about also toward the bottom of the first or the top of the second. So for me, it's a perfect segue in the guy we're about to talk about. So fire away, my man.
Yeah, so I regret even asking the question because I don't like your answer. but I get it, man. I get it. It breaks my heart to think that I could possibly be in store for more of what I had to live through last season. But Rhett, I know A.J. Brown. He's on the screen right here. He's highlighted in your rankings. I know he's one of my guys this year, and you're the highest.
Beautiful.
You're the highest of us 3 in your rankings right now for the early 2023 redraft rankings. So the floor is yours. Gas up your boy.
Dog, in a world of Ferraris at the wide receiver position, A.J. Brown is the diesel truck that is getting ready to punch you in the face and come with raw power, dog. So, listen, last year, my man A.J. Brown had 1,496 receiving yards on only 88 catches. Do the math at 17 yards per reception. He was used in all areas of the field. He was number 4 in overall air yards. He was number 6 in deep targets. But at the same time, he was also number 2 in the league in yards after catch. So say what you want about him. And yes, I get y'all a little lower on him. But also, let's keep rolling. A.J. Brown had a 12.5% touchdown rate last year, which means on 12%, on basically 13% of his catches, he scored. Is that unsustainable? Probably. But a 25% regression in that area still puts him around a 10% touchdown rate, which is still elite. So look, he's big, he's efficient, he gets deep, he runs after the catch. A.J. Brown does it all. And I get loving the other players of the position because, as we discussed, wide receiver is deep as hell this year. But with A.J. Brown at a late first-round ADP, I really feel like it's super smart to wait on that receiver late in the first round because, like I said, a Devontae Adams or an A.J. Brown can be had at the back half of that first round. And going further, if we looked at it last year, even with Devontae Smith emerging, Dallas Goedert, all these different guys, AJ still did what he did. So to me, it's a slam dunk. Like, where can you go wrong with him, barring injury, which with everybody is a risk. But AJ Brown to the moon, baby.
He's got an elite nickname, Swole Batman. So
Swole Batman, yeah, Swole Batman and Skinny Batman there at the wide receiver position for Philadelphia. I'll tell you, A.J. Brown is responsible for one of my favorite memories from last season whenever they were playing the Steelers, and he racked up those 3 touchdowns, and then on that third touchdown, they had him in double coverage. He caught the touchdown over both those guys and then proceeded to just point at each of them after he caught the touchdown. That man's got the – if you got the dog factor into your rankings, he's probably wide receiver 1 overall because that man's got that dog in him. I love it. And one thing that is very clear is the wide receiver position at the NFL is just loaded with talent. I mean, we could go 25, 30 deep before, and still be talking about guys that are just talent on talent on talent. I mean, we got, Fantasy Dysfunctional in the chat. He agrees with you, Rhett. He likes AJ as a solid value as well. And I don't hate it either. I think AJ's in for another big year. Him and Jalen Hurts are almost like stepbrothers at this point with the whole we just become best friends. I mean, they had that connection before he even made it to Philly. So I like the pick a lot. So any closing remarks, anything before we get out of here from either of you guys?
Go ahead, Rhett.
Look, Drew, I just want to let you know that if you're going to throw me off the show, first off, I forgive you and I love you. And if this was the last ride, it was a hell of a last ride. And I love you guys no matter what happens, man.
Look, Rhett, I love you too much to throw you off, man. Cooper Kupp hate aside, I don't know why you hate the man so much, but Cooper Kupp hate aside, I couldn't have you go anywhere. So I appreciate you being here, Chris, as well. I can tell you guys, both of y'all, this is basically what I look forward to every week. Don't tell my wife, don't tell my kids, but getting to chop it up with you guys, talk ball for an hour or so once a week. This is like the highlight of my week. So I wouldn't change it for a thing. But all right, fellas, that's a wrap for our early receiver and running back rankings. Once again, don't forget to follow the show over at Fourth and Frames, and you can find us on Twitter at rmanuelsports, at FFChrisB, and I'm at Drew3MR. And then, of course, the man behind the glass, Gator J, at FantasyJ77. On behalf of my boys, Rhett and Chris, I'm Drew. This has been another episode of Fourth and Frames. Make sure to join us next week whenever we go through our way too early top 12 for quarterbacks and tight ends. But until then, y'all take care, and we're out.